Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tezos Insider. This is the future of Tezos media and news. My name is Ken Garofalo, and today we have the pleasure to speak with Berner Setterwall, CTO of TezBaking.com. How are you doing today, Berner?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for having me, and hello.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. And we have some really unique questions and topics to dive into today. A lot of it has to do with tokenizing on the Tezos platform. And so what you've done is you guys have actually built a baking service where you have a tokenized bond pool. So before we get into a little bit about your background, do you want to just give a very brief overview on tokenized bond pool?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, when the BetaNet launched, we decided that we wanted to run a baker, and we started playing around on the zero nets and alpha nets, and then eventually we launched our baker. And initially, we thought that actually kind of attracting delegators would be like the big challenge. But I think in those early days, like a lot of people just kind of took a random baker, and we managed to reach out and basically fill all the capacity that we had. And at that point we figured, maybe we should just invest some more and try to increase the bond pool. But it came to a point where we felt that maybe we should actually try to open this up and try to actually use the blockchain to make a smart contract and the bond pool. So at that point, we came up with an idea for the DAB, which I guess it's a little bit of a play on the DAO, but the idea is to have like a decentralized owned baker. So we made a smart contract where folks can kind of join our baking pool or leave it using like on-chain, so to speak, and try to tokenize our baking basically.
Cool. So yeah, we'll dive deeper into it, but essentially, this token represents some sort of rights to redeem the XTZ that people are contributing towards the bond pool.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, you enter the bond pool at a certain price, and then the value of the tokens keep increasing as we bake, or at least, we'll kind of deposit the profits from the baking towards the smart contract, and then when you exit with your tokens, you will get your share of the profits.
So I almost compare this. I've done a little reading at the EOS recently. They have the EOS DAC, decentralized autonomous delegate. Similar. It seems similar to what Tezos here and what you guys are doing here at the bond pool. You mentioned the DAO as well with Ethereum. So before we get into any more of those details, why don't you give us a little bit of your background? So where did you study at school? And why did you get into cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I'm kind of a self-taught coder. So I spent the kind of mandatory 9 years in school in Sweden, and then did another 3 years. That is kind of very common. But then, like prior to joining university, I figured maybe I can just get a job as a coder and then study later. And this later part has yet to happen. So I started my first coding job as a 19-year-old. And then that was in a kind of networking hardware company. After that, I moved on to a startup in the spam filtering business. And after that, I worked or founded a startup in the advertising business or advertising software, like optimization software business. And when we sold that company in 2015, I all of a sudden got kind of a lot of time on my hands. Obviously there was the whole kind of integrating with the acquiring company and all of that. But at least from a kind of startup risk perspective, I could focus on new things. And that coincided pretty neatly with the launch of the Ethereum mainnet. And I had heard about like cryptocurrencies from a lot of my other kind of coder friends and stuff, but I hadn't really had the time to like properly look into it. So that gave me kind of the time and opportunity to really do some reading and to buy some Ethereum, and that's how my crypto journey started.
Yeah, like a lot of people we've talked to on this recent upward cycle, it's Ethereum that brought them in. So if you started with Ethereum, why did you progress onto Tezos?
Yeah. So, I mean, Ethereum was a really interesting journey from the start, and as time progressed, people started exploring what different kinds of smart contracts could you actually build. And one of the kind of early prominent ones was obviously the DAO. And we thought, me and my friends that were into Ethereum and discussing it on a daily or weekly basis, we jumped on the bandwagon and basically put some Ethereums into the DAO. And obviously, when the DAO got hacked, that was kind of a cold shower showing, the potential risks of doing smart contracts. And
sort of a rude awakening, right? When you wake up and all of a sudden it's been hacked.
But on the other hand, I mean, that's the story of crypto from the beginning. I think it's ups and downs and craziness all the time. So that was a good lesson at the time. And then obviously they managed to fork Ethereum and kind of resolve it and enable people to withdraw their Ethereum Classic and stuff like that. So it wasn't like super bad, even though obviously that kind of all-time high came and went. But it's also changed like the whole community and thinking around smart contracts, I think, and kind of put a big break on that for some time. And then as kind of regular ICOs started taking off, I wasn't like super interested in the alternatives that came up until I heard about Tezos, which really kind of piqued my interest. Obviously because of the formal verification aspects, which would kind of prevent another DAO style event, or at least make it less likely. And I figured that would be kind of a really important aspect in building like actual important infrastructure on top of the blockchain. So that made Tezos look like a really interesting ICO. And then I guess in my previous startup, we did a lot of functional programming in another language called Erlang. So I was kind of familiar with the whole functional programming paradigm, and that also made sense that Tezos was built in OCaml, and it sounded like a really solid attempt to solve formal verification as well, not just kind of that they were talking about it, because obviously a lot of people were doing that, but it also sounded like they could walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
That's very interesting. So coming from someone who uses these smart contracts in real world situations, you've seen the value added that the Tezos project brings to the whole cryptocurrency ecosystem, trying to solve this problem of formally verifying the smart contracts. So if there's any great store of value being put on these smart contracts, you'd more than likely want them to be formally verified, so the ins and outs are going to work properly the way you expect them to, right?
So yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's even more like it's almost, a lot of people have asked us, is your contract audited? And obviously I have a lot of really skilled tech friends, so I've asked some people that I know and trust to audit my code, and of course, like having been in like the computing space for a long time and having had like computing security as a major interest for like maybe, I don't know, for 17 years now, it's kind of always in the back of my mind. And there's also been some like really helpful people in the Tezos community who have reached out to us and kind of given us some pointers of possible attack vectors. But that kind of got me thinking, should I, what's the next thing to build on Tezos? Should I build like a smart contract where people can, provide a signature for other smart contracts as a kind of proof of audit or something like that? Is this a possible, business model to run on the blockchain? But then I started discussing this with some people, and what it comes down to is that humans make mistakes sometime, and even though the top 10 reviewers on smartcontractreviewer.com have checked my contract, it's no guarantee.
Yeah, right? There's still always this aspect, right? It could still be missing, whatever level of verified
Exactly,
code.
and
Right?
then maybe there are adversarial cases where somebody is kind of signing contracts and then hacking them later, or there are all those kind of crazy scenarios, and the only kind of viable solution to this, I think, is formal verification. Because if you have like a math proof, then you have to break math, and that's a lot harder, I suppose.
Yeah, rather trust math than trust the human, right?
Yeah,
As always.
I mean, sadly, but I guess that's also the power of blockchain, that it's kind of trustless trust or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting stuff. So let's move on to the conversation of token standards on Tezos. So this is a relatively new project. We've only seen mainnet live for a handful of months here, and there's no current standard of token like we see with Ethereum, the ERC20 standard. That's not yet happened on Tezos. Do you want to give us a little bit of insight on what you're seeing as far as development in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, as somebody who's kind of tokenizing a baking bond, this is a really interesting question, because obviously we have people that they enter the DAB using one address, and then they get a new ledger and they want to put their DAB tokens on that ledger. And currently we opted not to support transfers, so they would have to exit and then re-enter our smart contract. And I think from that perspective alone, it would be really helpful to have like a standardized token standard. And we have been researching the different alternatives. Like even when we wrote the first version of the DAB back in like, let's see, was it October? We basically researched the different alternatives, and so far I think there's no like real clear winner. Some of these are still like the possible template contracts are still seeing commits or seeing like at least semi-active development, and to my knowledge none of the like blockchain explorers have implemented any token standard in the same way that for example Etherscan supports ERC20 tokens. But one of the token standards that we have been considering and following kind of closely is the implementation, or like the sample token implementation made by OCaml Pro, who also have built liquidity smart contract programming language on top of Michelson, which is I guess our current go-to programming language for Tezos. And I think that's kind of a really solid contender, especially given that OCaml Pro is also the guys building TZScan, which is, I suppose, one of the best explorers for Tezos. Another alternative that we have been looking into is the token standard proposed by Cat Sigma, who is also a Tezos Foundation grantee, and they also have kind of an experimental decentralized exchange that at least was working on the AlphaNet for some time, and obviously tokens that can be traded or that are supported by some major DEX on Tezos would also be kind of a really interesting property, because maybe people would want to kind of exit or enter a baking pool in like bigger volume, or that demand could change the price of baking pools in ways that kind of a fixed smart contract would not support in of itself.
Right. There's all these like ancillary services that need to be developed to help support the tokens once they're standardized, right? So you have the decentralized exchanges that will be built that need to be utilized to trade these tokens versus the XCZ or versus other tokens. And you need sort of like wallets and explorers that are going to recognize the tokens. So like
exactly.
Like
I
my
mean, wallet
Ether
support is huge. I mean, also for like building smart contracts. Like when we started out, there wasn't even like full smart contract support in Testbox, for example. So we had to do like a proposed implementation ourselves, and then they caught up and made a better version. But But I mean, yeah, it's a young ecosystem, and a lot of this stuff is kind of yet to be built. So we're trying to follow this space really closely.
In your eyes, what is your best estimation of time until we'll see a standardized token on Tezos?
Yeah, so this is kind of the tricky part, right? You could go ahead and just take the liquidity token and say, somebody still has to kind of pronounce it the standard. And I think, maybe TZ Scan are in the best position to do that, because I suppose they are like the biggest site for exploring the Tezos blockchain. But I've been trying to poke them to actually implement it, but so far I haven't gotten any firm date. And obviously, like, if there are no tokens, there's no need to have a token standard kind of support in the Explorer, or like it's a kind of chicken and egg problem. But I suppose sooner or later it will be resolved. But it's kind of a problem that needs to be solved from both ends, I think.
Yeah, well, that's definitely some good insight from someone on the know, someone who's participating, creating their own token and dealing with all these services. So interesting with the decentralized exchange. I would love to see that pop up on Tezos, and that would go hand in hand with the standardized token. And that's something that would really put us on par with other protocols that are doing smart contracts, like Ethereum, like
Yeah,
EVOS.
exactly. I think it's especially like a market function can be really interesting for people also, trying to build other type of services, because obviously, like, we have been thinking about, okay, so maybe we take the proposed standard by OCaml Pro, we publish like a transferable token, and then we make our own like decentralized exchange for just one token type that is our Baker tokens, and it will kind of look like our smart contract today. But that's kind of a lot of work when we could just piggyback on one or more decentralized exchanges that maybe invest more in their user experience and attract a wider audience as well. So I think it would be really great to get those sort of players on the Tezos blockchain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even breaking it down to a simple ICO smart contract where you're giving Tez and you're receiving the token of whatever the project is that you're funding. That's, to me, the simplest version of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I did like a little bit of a Twitter poll to see what the interest was, but I heard a lot of like pushback with people not wanting ICOs on Tezos, and I suppose that a lot of people have become kind of scared because, like, obviously at least some sites are talking about the sell pressure on Ethereum that's kind of created by all the ICOs, and obviously it's the whole ICO thing is kind of a wild west. But at the same time, I think that if fear of the future is stopping you from doing things, you're not moving forward.
That's a great quote. We'll have to put that in quotations on the edited version here. So let's move into some of the questions we have lined up here about your baking service. So again, this is tezbaking.com, and you are the CTO. So you are the one that set up the node, created the token. You're the technology guy. But what do you want to see in terms of tools provided to the ecosystem that would make your job easier?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that more monitoring tools for like the whole node and baker and endorser and the whole setup would be really great. Obviously, there is at least one provided by now I forget the name, but is it? Yeah, it's like it's a baker monitoring thing.
Okay, so just
yeah, it's called Kiln or something like that. It's hard to pronounce, but yeah, that's a really great tool. But I think kind of I look forward to them building more monitoring tools to kind of ensure the quality of the baking, especially if we are going to face like more spam attacks like the one we saw, or in and around kind of network upgrades, or like running test networks for proposed features. I think that is a whole area that will be kind of interesting to follow. How can we quality assure, if somebody proposes a change to the Tezos protocol, it's put to a vote, it's put into the test network phase, and how can we kind of ensure that it's behaving like we hope. That's the whole kind of tooling area that is yet to be built, I think.
Right, and that's a good point, because you're responsible for the reward generation for everyone that's delegating towards your baking service. So let's say you're
Yeah, not
offline.
only that, like imagine that somebody commits a really complicated patch, and then there is, say it's CK Snarks or something, and then, if there is some code in there that will kind of generate extra rewards for somebody in the special case, I don't know, like that's the whole point of running like the test version, but it's also kind of like the whole incentivation schemes of like blockchains are kind of, I suppose, hard to reason about. So I think that's an area that will need more kind of tooling to make it clear what these proposed changes mean as they arrive. I mean, some will be simple, like halving the block time. Maybe that will be kind of straightforward, but as we get into kind of more interesting evolution of the blockchain, that's where we'll need more tools, both as bakers and also as kind of voters in the Tezos voting system.
Exactly, agree with you on that. And so going back to your tokenized bond pool, so how do users actually go about buying the token for the bond pool, and how do they store it? Is this all done in-house on your website?
Yeah, so basically it's all hosted on the Tezos blockchain. So you send Tezos to the smart contract using some parameters, which is how you interact with more complicated smart contracts that actually have functionality. I mean, the KT1 addresses are also smart contracts, and our smart contract is also a KT1 address, but it has more code. So that means that you need to supply some parameters, and we have guides for this on our website. But basically, you send some amount of Tezos that will buy you a certain amount of tokens, and this is then recorded in the smart contract. So this is kind of very similar to how it would look in a ERC20 contract or in a future Tezos token contract. And then basically we will use the Tezos that you provided for baking and providing capacity for the baker. And then when you want to get your Tezos back and the profits, you will then send a zero amount, but a different set of parameters to the smart contract, which will then kind of cash out your tokens or a certain amount of your tokens.
Okay, so it's these parameters that you outline on your site that make the difference. You can't just go ahead and send the XTZ directly to the smart contract. You need to make sure these parameters. Yeah,
exactly. So you need a higher gas limit, a higher storage limit, and you need the parameters. And this is kind of, I think this is also kind of a user experience thing that will be worked out in the wallets in the future, that basically these parameters are kind of predictable how they will need to look. So if you look at the Try Liquidity developer tool provided by OCaml Pro, they actually kind of scrape the smart contract and provide like, these are the functions, these are their names, and these are the way the parameters should look. And I think that in the future, like the wallets will probably, or at least the good wallets will implement similar kind of interaction functionality for like any smart contract, so that it's easier to use. But currently, you need to kind of copy paste the parameters from our webpage, or that's the easiest way, at least.
Okay, that's good to know. So this leads us into how you deal with over delegation in your baking service. I know this is a situation that has arisen. People are discussing this in the Reddit forum, all over the internet, of how bakers are going to deal with over delegation. So what's your plan?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, we're currently in cycle 64, so the kind of peak bond requirement has more or less happened, I think. And the strategy that we implemented was that basically, as we were getting close to our delegation capacity, we were kind of trying to predict out what kind of capacity we would have during the peak, and that's kind of now. But when we were getting close to that amount, we basically increased the prices of charge to delegators by a lot. So we used to have a 5 to 10% pricing scheme where you basically got the discount the longer you stayed with us. And then we said for new delegators, we're going to charge like 20% fees. And that basically switched the incentives around. So now after that, it looked a much more like a much better deal to join the DAB, obviously to be part of our pool. And I think that move enabled us to get more people into our baking pool. So we currently have 33 addresses participating with a total of a little bit more than 540,000 Tezos. And that enabled us to kind of get the capacity needed. So when we felt that we had kind of accelerated the DAB, we had a discussion with some of our DAB holders. We have like a special Telegram group for people in the bond pool. And we kind of collectively came to the conclusion that we should then lower the pricing to 15% to kind of ride out the storm. And that's where we're currently at. So in terms of delegation capacity, we could bake another 400K today. So I think that was the kind of trade-off. We tried to both make the pricing less attractive for delegators and more attractive for bond pool members, and then try to look ahead and see that we weren't over delegated without kind of knowing about it.
You guys have definitely a very unique solution there, and it is because the tokenized bond pool that you have. So definitely glad to hear that's how you guys are managing and dealing with over delegation. So let's turn to profitability. Is running a baker profitable for you now? Do you plan on being profitable in the future? What's the whole breakdown there?
Exactly. We actually plan to make a loss until infinity. No. So at current prices, running a baker is not super profitable. I would say that maybe it's even a little bit unprofitable, but not by a whole lot. So I mean, that's the current situation, and I think it's kind of, in a sense, the situation in a lot of the crypto space, not specifically Tezos, but like a lot of miners or other kind of stakeable cryptocurrencies are also in that situation. And I think for our service, we have the abilities to sustain it using other means, because we have like a group of companies. So we also run a company doing like internet growth consultancies. So that's kind of our advertising roots. So we're obviously like supplementing the revenue from the baking with other cash flows currently. But I think that, this is crypto and things go up and down, but generally, up and to the right. So sooner or later, this is going to look like a really attractive business. But I was talking to a friend who is like a true Bitcoin believer the other day, and he said that, it's when the miners start, nearing bankruptcy, that's when it kind of changes direction. And we have a company in Sweden that survived, a couple of crashes that was in the mining industry. They actually finally went bust, like just prior to the last boom of Bitcoin. So that was sad for them, of course. But I think that it's kind of part of the whole cycle dynamic. And unfortunately for us, we haven't invested in like ASICs that will go obsolete because of new ASICs or whatever other reason in a few years. It's just kind of pretty generic hardware, and then obviously like the Tezos investment as well.
Yeah, that's sort of the point that I keep trying to pound home during all these videos here, is to invest in mining Tezos or baking Tezos, you have to buy the XTZ. Really, that's your greatest expense. Mining Bitcoin, your greatest expense is the ASICs and the GPUs that go obsolete, almost immediately. So there's a benefit there in the Tezos.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, we for a time considered to be like a Ethereum miner, because we're into it. Like, I mean, this was maybe 2016 we were discussing it, and it would probably have been profitable for some time during 2017, but I don't regret the decision not to be a miner in Ethereum today.
So let's move on here to the question of, how would you encourage more people to become bakers? Do you think this is going to happen maybe when the price of XTZ starts going up, or how would you see that?
Yes, I mean, I think it will happen gradually, both from when like the user experience becomes more easy. I mean, if you were a baker a few months ago during the hack attacks and all of that, or like, sorry, the spam attacks and all of the upgrades, and like that was a pretty tricky time to be a baker. And for us, we were kind of simultaneously updating our rewards payment software, so that was kind of stressful. And then, you know, fees changed, and it was, yeah, that was a bit chaotic. But I think that as we get more and more mature in the kind of change process, and we had, you know, all the performance testing already done, that will put or like make baking an easier job. So then obviously that will enable more people to come on board, and of course also the profitability, I suppose, is a big kind of driver for baker adoption. But I think that's kind of also the beauty of Tezos, that we for some time we were also considering if we should try to be like a delegation or like a block producer or whatever it's called for Lisk. But then there was the problem that there was already, they have like a system where there is 110 people that actually get to make the blocks, and then if you're not in that position, you basically can't do any of their blocks. And to get like in that position, you needed like, I don't know what it was, like 300 million Lisks or 300,000, whatever, a huge amount of Lisk kind of delegated to you. And we just figured that we were too late to the race, and there was no possibility to even become like a small block producer or like staker for that cryptocurrency. And I think the same situation, I mean, the situation is even worse for like, if we wanted to be an EOS block producer, we would have to get into a secret magic club. And, you know, that's a huge strength for Tezos, that basically all you need is 10,000 Tezos, and you don't even have to own them all yourself. You could get delegations, and you're kind of up and running as a baker. And I mean, Arthur talks about cutting the bond or like the minimum role size in 10 in the future, so that will make it like highly distributed. So that's, I think that's really cool, and really something that makes me you know, believe more in Tezos as a decentralized blockchain.
Yeah, 100% agree with you as well. There's less barrier to entry. It's not politically driven. You don't have to gain votes to get in the top 20 positions in order to participate here. So let's end it on this. Do you have any future plans or news announcements that you wanted to drop on the show here today?
No, I think currently we have some ideas, and we're playing with some, you know, concepts, but we haven't really you know, pulled the trigger on actually launching those projects yet. So we're still in the kind of ideation phase, I would say, with yeah, our other crypto projects.
Well, that's awesome. That's a good follow-up. We'll have to have you back on the show if anything else does arise. And thank you so much. Again, this is Berner Setterwall, CTO of TezBaking.com, and I am Ken Garofalo. Thank you for watching Tezos Insider, the future of Tezos media and news. Thanks so much, Berner. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.